welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have returning guest, the first ever Sweet Science of Fighting podcast guest, Steve Pipe. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you for having me, James. Thank you for having me, James. It's been good, bro. Since you first had me on your podcast, I've actually had a lot of people reach out to me because of the podcast. So, good job, man. Nice work, bro. Yeah,
dude.
Bro.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love the fact that the podcast is helping you get clients and all sorts of stuff like that. So, no, that's awesome. We've got a bit of lag going on this one, but that's all right. We'll make it work. So, since that last podcast, then hopefully we can get you some more people reach out to you too. But what have you been up to since then? Anything new that you've learned in? I think it's been over a year now. Anything new you've learned over the year? Anything new that you're implementing with your fighters?
Oh. Yeah, definitely, bro. I mean, you know me, I'm a student of the game. I'm always trying new stuff out, and I'm always trying to just continually learn. I think that's, as a coach, especially when you're working with a lot of different athletes, high level athletes, it's important for you and just people in general, I think it's important to keep things fresh. Obviously you have your bread and butter, that's your go-to that works. It works, it's tried and true, but you still need to keep things fresh. You still need to keep mixing up, and you need to keep learning too. And having people that having knowledge sources or people that you can go to learn stuff that you feel is going to be applicable to what it is that you do, and then being able to directly apply that into athletes or just even general population people is a really cool thing to be able to do. So yeah, since then I've done a few different courses around one being around skill acquisition, which was really interesting, and the other one being around the rib cage, the lungs, and how we kind of position, how we can create positions through our breathing, and using the rib cage and using the lungs as kind of your foundation to build the external musculature on top of. So if you think about your body kind of like a sandwich bag, if you squeeze one side like this, when you fill it with air, that air is forced to go onto the backside. And if you compress the backside and leave the side relaxed, obviously as the air flows in, it's forced to go here. So just understanding how when we breathe in, how that affects, the external musculature. That's been something that I've been working a lot on, and that's been really cool. And then the other one is kind of just around sensory input pathways. So basically trying to create a greater ability for my athletes to have a higher awareness or higher level of self-awareness of where they are in space. So sensory input drives motor output. So basically, the greater ability we have at knowing where we are in space, the more force we can apply into any given situation. So yeah, that's been the two kind of main things that I would say I've kind of been putting my time and effort into.
Nice. Yeah, I like that I guess that spatial awareness, sensory awareness. If anyone's interested in kind of going a little into that and a little more, I guess, voodoo as well, check out the episodes with Dan Fichter and Sean Sherman. They dive into some of that stuff. But how are you implementing that then? Let's start there. How are you implementing that with your fighters in terms of the sensory work to improve physical output?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. So basically every lobe in our brain has a visual receptor in it. So we're inherently very visual creatures. We're very visual in terms of how we learn, and so obviously that's heavily reflected in the fact that we have a visual receptor in every lobe of our brain. So when we look to polish the other sensory input pathways, so we have vestibular apparatus and we have the spinocerebellum. So these two pathways, they can be polished. Vestibular apparatus is these tubes, right, that feed into our brain, and they're filled with fluid, and there's these hairs, and as that fluid swishes, that's it makes these little crystals on the hairs, and that's what tells our brain where we are in space. So we have the vestibular apparatus, and then we've got the spinocerebellum, which is essentially like Smeagol from like Lord of the Rings, like that suit that they wear to like map out where it is in space. So it's like a whole lot of like these kind of like sensory, like sensors all over the body that kind of tell us where we are in space, right? So when we're looking to kind of polish those pathways, we essentially need to remove the visual sensory feedback that we get from, for example, just being able to look at our feet or look at our legs or see ourselves in a mirror, for example. So like looking at ourselves in a mirror, taking the mirror away, little things like that. We don't even realize how much of an impact it's actually having on us from a skill development perspective. And you could even argue that it's not even like you're not actually developing the skill of the movement, you're developing the skill of correcting the movement, right? By seeing yourself in the mirror and making the adjustments, you know? So it's like that age-old saying, you don't truly know something until you can do it with your eyes closed, right? So I'm not saying shut your eyes and deadlift or something like that, but okay, something that I've been playing around with, which has been quite fun, is just as like a warm-up to get things going, is like, okay, let's do walking lunges, but I'm going to give you a fixed target, and you have to keep your head fixed, your vision fixed on that target, and you're going to lunge straight, but your head is going to maintain on that target. So you'd be surprised, bro, the amount of like top level athletes that I work with. I get them to do that. The first set they do, they're all like discombobulated, like everything's just fucking falling all over the show. Just walking lunges. It's not even like a complicated exercise, right? And then when the second round that they do it, they kind of get their bearings, you know, those other sensory input pathways start to kick in. They start to give them that feedback about where they are in space. And then all of a sudden the movement starts to look really good again. So yeah, things like that has been really, really interesting and really fun. And yeah, just lots of different drills where I guess it's like a heightened awareness of these type of training tools. So knowing that, okay, if I have an athlete that's struggling with a certain movement, putting them in front of a mirror is going to be a regression from a sensory input perspective, because they're going to be able to see like so much. They're going to get so like flooded with this visual feedback. And in order to progress it, it's like I take them away from the mirror and I get them to do the exercise, you know, freestanding. Now, all of this stuff, it might sound quite like straightforward, you know, and it is kind of to some degree, but I think it's just about being aware of these things and like how they actually affect the athletes that we're working with. And then, you know, for example, like an overhead press, like a single arm overhead press, right? Like if we can look at ourselves in front of a mirror, like a bottoms up press is a good one, because if you can see your wrist and your elbow in the mirror, then when you're pressing up, you're able to keep that weight nice and stacked because you're visually able to see this. But then all of a sudden you take that mirror away and you just start to see the technique go all weird. And it's like, well, they just can't see themselves doing the exercise, right? So just something as simple as that has been a really interesting thing for me to integrate, bro.
Yeah, I love this topic as well. We've talked about it a bit on the podcast, but it reminds me, I don't know if you've come across or heard or seen infinity walks. And then as a progression from infinity walks, I don't know if you've seen Cal Dietz's goat drill at all.
Nah, bro, I haven't, man. I've seen a lot of Cal Dietz stuff, but I haven't seen the goat drill.
Yeah, so maybe I'll send them to you after this, but it's basically what you're doing with the walking lunge, but keeping a fixed spot on the wall. So the infinity walk is like a figure eight, but you have a fixed spot on the wall the entire time, so your head has to move around as you walk. And they use that kind of stuff for, I guess you could say, as part, like as you are with a warm up to prime everything. And then the goat drill is like the infinity walk on steroids, where there's like 3 circles you're running figure eights around while passing a ball around your back, while keeping your eyes on a target, or you know, having someone in the circles that are trying to tag you, things like that. It's interesting stuff. It sounds super voodoo, but there's so many people using stuff like that now, like including yourself, and seeing results doing it. There's definitely something to it, and it's a really, really interesting topic.
Yeah, I think when you like look a bit deeper into like the brain itself and the different lobes of the brain, and you see how how that feedback is transferred through to the brain, and you see like how that sensory feedback, like, okay, for example, we go into like a machine weight, right? A machine weight, we have an overwhelming amount of sensory feedback when we're sitting on that. Let's say, for example, we're sitting on, I don't know, like a machine chest press. Okay, so I've got like the seat underneath my feet. I've got these like lovely handles. I can like visually like see so many things. Like there's so many like components, right? That I've got, like so much componentry that I've got that I can see. I've got this feeling of like this chair under my butt, you know, like I'm upright, my feet are on the ground. Like this, I can just see so much. I've got so much external support and like sensory input flooding into me, right? But then if I go and do like a dip, for example, well, now my legs are like dangling in the air. I've got like basically like no like feedback whatsoever. You know, I'm just looking at this weight, and even then I could just look up, right? And then all of a sudden I'm like, there's just so much for my brain to calibrate just off of that one exercise, you know? And it's just understanding like, okay, well, that's like a high challenge exercise from a sensory perspective, and this is a high challenge exercise from like an output perspective, right? So we're able to run like if we're talking about the machine weight, we're able to run like a shit ton of output here. Over here, we're going to get a massive challenge to like our sensory input pathways in terms of calibrating where we are in space, and then still obviously having to overcome that and lift a shit ton of weight there too, you know? So, yeah, it's an interesting topic, man, honestly. And then like, I look at some of the fighters that I train, and I feel like the ones that get it, you look at them and the way they fight, even like sparring with like this one guy, for example, Nikorali Kingi, you know, I started talking to him about this, and straight away he goes, oh yeah, I call that the sixth sense. And he's like, you know, like you'll be sparring with him and he'll just go, like if you cut an angle off to the side, you just feel this back fist come to your face, and you're like, oh, what the hell was that, bro? Like, you know, like he's letting you here, you pivot off that way, and he just goes, whoa, bam, boom, 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 like this. And it's like, hey, you know, so there's something to it, bro, you know, like being able to be hyper aware of where you are in space at any given point in time is like one of the main kind of like core tenets of being like a high level athlete, isn't it? You know? And so obviously like with combat sports, strength and conditioning, we're essentially trying to create high level athletes. We're wanting to create athletes that have like a high degree of competency on multiple fronts, right? So using tools like this is definitely like something, something fun to play around with and to like integrate into your training. But then, just seeing how that type of training transfers over into like other exercises where we're looking to run more output. Like, you know, if we're going into like a deadlift, a bilateral deadlift or something like that, and just seeing like how those two kind of like work together.
No, I love that. That's awesome stuff. And you talked about at the beginning as well how you've gone through some skill acquisition stuff too. I'm assuming, I mean, some of this plays a little role in that too. But is the skill acquisition stuff more applying to the actual technical, say, Muay Thai MMA training, or are you also using some of those principles within strength conditioning?
Bro, to be honest with you, man, my brain's always kind of like in both worlds. So I always like to think about it from like a skill development perspective. And I also like to think about it from like a strength and conditioning perspective, like strength training more specifically, because with a lot of the conditioning stuff from a general perspective, it's not that complicated, right? It's like, get on the assault bike and just fucking, you know, do your thing, right? There's not that high of a skill level there required to do that. But if we're talking about like weights training and like strength orientated skills or power skills or plyometrics, all that sort of stuff, there's definitely like a huge amount of merit to that there. And then obviously like with the skill side of things as well, massive application, bro. Like it makes, man, when I went through these courses and when I was doing all these studies, man, I was thinking to myself, like, fuck, if I could go back in time and like retrain myself, like how would I do it, you know? And then like, it just makes a lot of things make sense. So like something as simple as like Bruce Lee's statement, right? Like, I don't fear the man that knows 1,000 different kicks. I fear the man that's practiced one kick 1,000 times. So it's like instilling these like really, really good technical foundational habits from the very beginning and not really allowing ourselves to have quote unquote like bad reps, you know, like every single rep is a good rep. And it's like we just kind of build this foundation. You know, we wire our brain in a way that when we open the folder, let's say it's a Muay Thai round kick, right? I'm going to open up the Muay Thai round kick folder. If I have like 1,000 different variations of that kick because the coach that I'm working with has allowed my technique to slip so many times when I'm practicing, right? When I go to open that folder, it's like there's like a fuck ton of different folders in my head, and I don't even really know which folder that I want to open, right? So you're like, okay, you know, but if you've done like 1,000 reps and every single rep is the same as the last, sure, there's going to be like some variation, there's some variance, but if for the most part, it's like green, 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 orange, green, 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 orange, green, green, orange, green, maybe one red, then green, 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 green. I think about it like a block chart, you know, it's like every rep is like a little green square. And it's like, you know, you get to the end of like a block of training and you just got like 1,000 green squares, right? Whereas like, if you have like shit rep, like okay rep, shit rep again, good rep, shit rep, good rep, shit rep, you know, and then by the time you get to the end of the block, it's just got all these red patches throughout that graph, right? Throughout that chart. You're like, shit, when you go to open that folder, it's not so like congruent, you know? Whereas like if we have the sea of green, maybe an orange here or there or a yellow, and then by the time we get to like open that folder, when it actually comes to the crunch, it's like just what? Like all those green just like compound down into that one kick. And then it's just beautiful, right? It's like a thing of technical beauty. So yeah, that's something to like definitely for the people that are like getting into martial arts that might be listening to this is you know, really try to prioritize correct skill development from the start. And you know, I think if we're just looking to learn skill and like just improve our skill, then there's definitely like a line between, you know, what's actually going to be conducive to building skill and what is actually just mental toughness training, right? And like junk volume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I've talked to many different coaches, researchers, all sorts of stuff from this podcast and varying things. And it's funny, there's obviously different philosophies around the whole skill acquisition side. And I've talked to many people that talk about not so much that they don't like drilling, but more so like there's no such thing as a perfect punch or a perfect kick. So for them, drilling, it doesn't make sense. They just want to put you into situations and essentially do stuff like that. Then there's the other side. We've got people say, you know, there is a perfect technique for these certain things. And it's actually quite interesting. There's a guy I was starting to talk to and work with. He owns Strike Tech sensors, and he's actually mapped out essentially what makes, or close to what makes a perfect punch through his G-force data through that, which is pretty interesting. But obviously the perfect punch is dependent on timing and all sorts of other things within the ring, cage, whatever it is. So I would want to get your take on, for example, we mentioned someone starting, and you're talking about perfect or just learning the good technique to start with. Would you recommend someone ever, I don't know, go in their own and start learning from YouTube? Because obviously with other sports, for example, a good example is like Olympic weightlifting. You can start learning from YouTube and things, but you ingrain these bad habits. And it's a sport that is less forgiving in terms of technique. If you start ingraining these bad habits early, they become very hard to break. But with the combat sports, there's so many different styles. You know, you could say someone has bad habits or bad technique, but they're a great fighter because of the way they're able to time and read opponents. So where do you sit on that spectrum in terms of starting on your own versus starting and trying to learn properly from the very beginning?
Okay, cool. So just to like get some clarity around the question. So basically on one side, it's like someone just like watching YouTube and then just like going and like going live basically and just sparring essentially. And then on the other side, it's like someone that's got like a coach and they're like just like drilling like perfect technique and stuff like that. But maybe like more drilling, but not so much like actually like going live and like trying like real experience. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, but we can make it a little more in the middle ground instead of really far extreme. So someone who's just like trying to learn the technique themselves from YouTube, and they're hitting the bag and trying to throw these perfect strikes from YouTube versus doing it coaching wise.
Okay, good question, bro. Look, I think at the end of the day, like you look at like someone like Mark Hunt, right? And you say to him like, how did you learn how to strike? Like, how did you learn? He's like, I just watched Street Fighter, the game, and it's like Street Fighter, like, okay, but then you see it in his fights, like, he's in the corner, he's getting smashed by like, what's that guy's name? Sheesh, I can't remember off the top of my head, but that massive Dutch dude that was just like punishing him in the corner, and then he just goes, wham! No, this is back in
Stefan
the K1
Struve?
days, bro. Not Stefan Struve.
No. Back in K1. Okay, yeah.
Labana. Maybe he's French. I can't remember. But anyways, he was just punishing him in the corner, and then he just goes, whoa! And it literally looked like a Shoryuken from like Street Fighter. Like Ryu's like charging up, just taking all the shots, and then just boom, just cling, like knockout. So, you've got like, obviously you're going to have like people that are just talented, they're like physically just built for fighting. So, we always have to like understand that as like kind of like, there's always going to be like these like outliers, right? Outside of like the general scope of things. I think from what's like optimal, I'd always say having someone like some kind of coach to like observe your technique. And I think the other consideration that we have to take in here is that there isn't like one size fits all when it comes to striking. Like everyone has a different body type. Everyone's going to have different things, like specific strikes and techniques that just work for their body. And they're going to have other strikes that don't, that maybe it takes them a little bit longer to find something, just from like a pure like biomechanical route. Like it takes them a lot longer to figure out exactly what it is that they have to do in order to get power and, efficiency into those movement patterns. So, but yeah, from like an overall perspective, I would say that like just from like a general overall perspective, I would say that it's better off to have a coach that you work with, even if it's like they're just overseeing your training. I think that's always going to be better than if you're just doing stuff on your own. So yeah, that would be like what I would say, bro. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's a good question to ask you, and for anyone listening. Steve's fought professionally in Thailand with Muay Thai and things, and he's obviously on the coaching side too with the strength conditioning. So he's got a good view from both sides, and it's good to have his perspective on that. But I wanted to come back to your strength conditioning side too, and obviously you train a lot of Muay Thai, a lot of MMA athletes. Feel free to name drop any of them on this podcast too. But I want to know how or if your strength conditioning practices at all differ between your MMA and your Muay Thai athletes, and if they do or don't, why?
Yeah, that's a really good question, bro. Yeah, really good question. It's something that I've kind of been like refining over time, and now I feel like I'm in a position where I can give you like a pretty good answer. So I don't look at it from MMA versus Muay Thai anymore. Like I don't look at it like that at all. What I look at is I watch tape of their fights, and I look at like the attributes that are associated with the strikes that are their most devastating weapons. Okay. So for example, if I have someone that's like very punch heavy, that's a very punch heavy striker that doesn't really punch heavy striker / wrestler, that doesn't really utilize too much in terms of like hip rotation. So they're like much more like, they've come much more through like the MMA route. So obviously they don't have like a very like they don't use what would be considered optimal biomechanics from a boxing perspective or even a Muay Thai perspective. They're much more like just like arm punches and then like forward pressure and then obviously like wrestling, right? So someone like that, rather than trying to like work on a whole lot of things that essentially are going to kind of like it's like their style is going this way, and then like the training that you're doing is going that way, right? So rather than trying to like cross in opposite directions, I just try to kind of like enhance the rocket ship that is already them. So essentially looking at the attributes in terms of like what it is that they do when they're striking or when they're fighting and competing, and then asking myself the question is like, what exercises can I do that allow these athletes to enhance those strikes? Like looking at what they do when they're actually fighting, what works for them. You know, if they've got like, for example, like a shit ton of finishes from like flying knees, or like when they fight, they just do flying knee on flying knee, or they just very heavy handed, they just throw massive bombs, but like I was saying before, they don't really like rotate the hips too much. So then for someone like that, we're going to be more predicated towards like upper body strength, because the hip side of things is almost non-existent, you know, like they're just arm punching, you know, and it's like we're they're so far into their career that to change those biomechanics, especially for me as a strength and conditioning coach, like I'm not their skills coach, you know, like it's not my role to say that, right? So I'm just like, okay, like this got you to the party, let's just like fucking send it on that front, you know. Whereas like, you know, obviously like the cool thing for me is like when I get like, because what's happening now, I've got a lot of like my Muay Thai guys that are transitioning now into MMA. So this is where it gets fun, right? Because it's like an uncharted territory, you know. Like we've got like, for example, I've got this one fighter, Nico Ali Kingi. He just won King of the Ring for the third time. So that was like a massive thing. So if anyone doesn't know what King of the Ring is, I know you know, but for anyone that doesn't know, it's an 8-man tournament. Basically, they have to fight 3 fights in one night against the best fighters in the country. So this guy, he won that tournament on 3 separate occasions. So he's like the top dog, you know. He's had around about like 50-ish fights, and now he's transitioning into professional MMA. So it's a pretty like big transition. But yeah, for someone like him, basically what we want to do is like enhance attributes that would help him with stopping takedowns, and then look at making sure that all of the things that are his strongest suits, which is obviously his striking, is super sharp, super powerful. So basically like just what we've been doing, plus we just add in specific exercises that's going to like, give us a little bit of an edge on that front. But yeah, most of the time, man, I just kind of go off like what the athlete's telling me, right? So I start off with what I want them to get better at from like a general athleticism perspective. I build the function out with them, and I like help them to improve on certain like mobility, stability, strength, all that sort of things. Obviously, like our biggest thing for me is just like maximal strength. Like I just want my guys to be like insanely strong. Okay. And then from there, it's like once they have a fight lined up and we're like in camp, then we start to ramp up plyometrics, ballistics, you know, slightly more like specific exercises. But yeah, essentially like the maximal strength is like the goal, but like we don't want to get to the maximal strength and then like basically just like chop everything out in the process. We want to maintain all of that foundation that got us to that top point, and train in a way that integrates that into the program, right? And then from there, I just listen to the athlete. If they're telling me, bro, I feel amazing, I feel the strongest I've ever felt. Everyone in the gym is coming up to me and asking me like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing differently? You know, like these kind of like subjective things are like some of the best indicators that you're doing a good job, right? Like they look like a beast. They're training like a beast. They're doing insane fucking like crazy workouts in their skills training, but their body is able to handle it fine. All their training partners are saying, fuck, you're looking amazing, bro. You're training so well. They tell me inspiring, they're doing great. They're piecing everybody up. Awesome. Just keep doing what we're doing, right? Like obviously like what we're doing now is already like doing so well for you. Like it's going so well for you. Like we don't really need to change anything, you know? My mindset's shifted a lot in terms of like, you know, like peak performance. It's there. It's definitely a component in there. But I'm also like always asking myself the question of like, how can I keep my guys pain-free? How can I give my guys longevity in their career? How can I ensure that after they finish fighting, they still have a life after fighting? They're not just like a vegetable. Their body's not all fucked up. You know, like one of the biggest things that I've seen in my experience, like obviously, like you mentioned, I've done both, right? So one of the biggest things that I've seen that causes people to stop fighting is their bodies just being so fucking painful all the time. Like they're just in chronic pain. Chronic pain is what ends careers, you know? And then they end up having to get surgeries, and then like, you know, with surgeries come a lot of complications, and like structurally, like body's never really the same again. And then that's just kind of like the tail, like the career starts to kind of taper off from there.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but you got a shout out in the YouTube live chat here. I hope I say his name right. I'm not going to say it right. I'm sorry, but it's Danyan Togia. He says, Osu brother Steve Pipe also meeting you at Knees of Fury. So obviously you got a fan in the chat listening to you just before.
Yeah. Thank you, bro. Thanks for bringing that shout out in. Yeah, that guy's the man. He's a cool dude. I like him a lot.
No, awesome. So if you're listening to this on the replay, remember you can always join these live and ask questions too. But I wanted to come back to, you mentioned about, okay, you've got Muay Thai guy or kickboxer coming to MMA, great striker, but the one thing obviously you need to start to improve, takedown defense, grappling, etc. And you talked about, okay, you're going to add some of these exercises in to potentially help with that. So maybe there's someone listening who's a striker transitioning to MMA, or an MMA athlete looking to improve that in their game. What kind of exercises are you looking to do that meet that criteria?
Yeah, look, that's like a really good question, man. You know, I think, really, really good question. From like a overall like exercise selection perspective, most of the MMA guys that I've worked with, I found benefit hugely from doing things like Zercher squats and different variations of Zerchers, and just like in general, just putting a big emphasis on like hinging and like a big amount of time spent on like lat strength too. Mm-hmm. I mean, like this is the kind of going back to what I was saying before, you know, but like a lot of it at the end of the day is all kind of the same thing. It's just applied slightly differently, right? So when they're doing their skills training, you know, basically what I'm doing, I feel like my job is movement variability. I want my fighters to be able to go into any position and not get fucked up. Like I want them to feel like they can go anywhere the fight takes them, they can go there and they're fine, you know? Zercher squats are exercises that I like just purely from like a joint angle perspective. I feel like, you know, it just, especially for like strikers, I think it's a great exercise. I've seen that. I know like one of the biggest criticisms about it is like, oh, well, your arms are always going to be your rate limiter. But I've seen like a lot of the fighters that I've worked with hold like over 100 kilos comfortably on here and do squats, you know? So, like I've seen it work well. Split stance Zerchers, like Zercher RDLs, split stance Zercher RDLs. These kind of exercises I think are really, really cool. But yeah, obviously like there is like a rate limiting factor from the barbell being in the crux of the elbow. But outside of that, most of it is still going to be like pretty much the same thing. It's just going to be like about looking at the athlete and how their style changes from an MMA perspective, and then just looking to see like what attributes they bring to the table when they actually start competing. And then, you know, once we start to get data, then it makes things easier, right? And we get like both, like we get the feedback from the fight result itself, and we're able to kind of say like, okay, cool, like they won by first round knockout, like amazing. The guy tries to take them down, they stump the takedown, awesome, you know, that's fantastic. But yeah, it's a lot of it is still essentially going to be the same thing. I mean, that's I try not to change things too much, you know, because I already know what their body needs in order to be able to handle the demands of their sport. And from like a strength perspective, as long as we're hitting all of those categories, then they're good to go.
Nice. And I actually wanted so if anyone's not familiar, Steve wrote some of the first articles on Sweet Science of Fighting as well. He's got a few up there, and one of them is about kicking higher. So it would be awesome for you to maybe dive into some exercises or your philosophy or anything to do with improving the ability to throw head kicks, especially obviously people coming into the martial arts likely don't have the mobility, flexibility, awareness to be able to kick with the hips that fucking wide open. So what have you got for them?
I'd love to go through this, bro. This is a cool one for me. So when I started out doing Muay Thai, I was a low kicker. And that was purely because I couldn't fucking kick for shit, like when it came to like anything like waist or higher, you know? And I just kind of accepted, I'm probably not going to be able to do head kicks. Like my body just does not allow me to do head kicks. Fast forward to now, bro, when I'm sparring here, I've like accidentally dropped like 3 people with head kicks. And I'm like, I feel bad. My leg just like flies up there and I'm like, oh shit. He like did a lunge jab and I threw like a upper arm kick, but he kind of just went like that. It's boom, like I feel so bad, you know? But it's like my leg just effortlessly like flies up now. And I'm like, wow. Like when the kick's going up, I'm kind of looking at it and I'm like, wow. But then I'm like, oh shit, it's got to land on his temple. Oh fuck, I'm sorry, bro. Yeah. So you know, like, so that's like a little like personal testimonial to like what I'm saying works. So I think first and foremost, when it comes to like starting things off, like if people want to like get higher kicks, they need to think about their hip through like obviously 3 planes of motion: sagittal, frontal, transverse. So first stretch that I recommend for every fucking combat sports athlete that likes to kick, and even that don't like to kick, it's just a good exercise, is the couch stretch. So the couch stretch is like sagittal plane. I like to do the couch stretch though with a slight variation. So it's like couch stretch with hip internal rotation. So if let's say, for example, my left knee was against the wall, my right leg's forward, I'm going to like walk my right foot across. So it's in line with my left knee, which is against the wall. And then I'm going to like rotate my body like this. So that femur is like fixed there, but my pelvis is kind of like twisting on top of it. So it's causing that internal rotation in the hip capsule. So that's really important. Second range of motion would be the frontal plane. So I do something like a frog pose. So like lying on my forearms, splay my legs out to the side, just kind of like rocking back and forward. And one thing I want to say as well, just like pre-frame this, is like while you're doing these stretches, it's really important to breathe. So like breathing, if you're on a stretch and it's so intense, so damn tight that you can't even breathe, you're in too intense of a position. You're much better off going into a position where it's challenging. You feel the stimulus of the stretch, but you're actually able to like breathe and relax and overcome that stretch reflex as the time goes by. So normally I tell most people that do these exercises, just hold for around about 8 breaths. And then the next one is the pigeon pose. So like push up position. Let's say I was doing my right hip, right knee to right wrist. My right foot's coming across to my left hand. And then I don't actually like sink down to the side. I try to stay like quite like centered over the top of my hips. And I just really like assess how far away my knee is off the top, or away from the ground. So that's like a really, really good exercise from like an external rotation point of view of the hip. So those 3 exercises are really beneficial. They basically, what they're doing is they're kind of like increasing your like sensory awareness of like that joint capsule and allowing you to kind of temporarily expand outward from a neurological perspective, like neuroplasticity perspective. You're able to like kind of temporarily expand outward and explore this newfound range of motion. But just the stretching in and of itself, we know from like a lot of the data, is not the most conducive thing for performance. So if we downregulate too much, if we stretch too much, if we're just holding like lots of passive positions, then it's not the best if we're wanting to like produce maximal force at the same time. So then we need to integrate an exercise that allows our brain to explore those ranges of motion, but at the same time, it's a more active exploration that then creates a lot higher level of sensory awareness through that range of motion. So this is kind of like going back to what we were talking about earlier in the chat. So hip aeroplanes are a really good exercise. You've got it's a closed chain exercise. So obviously, like the hip that I'm working on, the foot and the hip that I'm working on is flat on the ground, and that's really important to me because when we do strike, our foot is on the ground. Sure, we're much more in like a late stance position when we're actually kicking, but like it's still important to be connected to the ground and understand how the hip actually functions when it's like you have like full foot pressure on the ground. So from there, it's like internal rotation and external rotation on a fixed femur. So that femur head is like fixed inside that socket, and then all the musculature on the outside and inside of the hip is rotating around it. So this is a really, really good exercise for helping your brain to kind of calibrate in that new range of motion that you've just kind of expanded out into with those 3 stretches that we started with. And then from there, another big one where people get kind of like screwed over is their inability to keep their rib cage stacked on top of their pelvis. So like when the rib cage is not stacked on top of the pelvis, a lot of the time the pelvis is dumping forward into this anterior tilted position. And when we're in this more anterior tilted position, it puts immense pressure on the adductors. So if you don't know what the adductors are, I know you do, bro, but like people don't know what they are. They're basically like your inner thigh / groin muscles. So if the pelvis is tilted forward, then when you go to kick, your adductors they're already stretched, and then you're kicking upward and you're trying to stretch them even further, and it feels like they're going to rip apart. So if you can actually just, pull the ribs down, keep that rib cage stacked, and understand how to generate the force from the hips, as opposed to like just compensating through the back, trying to like haphazardly whip your leg up. That's a really big one. So in terms of exercises, I'll just say just a plank. But when we're planking, we're actually trying to like create this flexion, like purposeful flexion, and then we're holding in the position, and we're trying not to let our back kind of go like that. We're trying to keep the rib cage stacked down on top of the pelvis. So yeah, just that is a really good one. And then we've got like suitcase hold or side plank, and then another good one would be like pull through. So again, just looking at 3 different planes of motion: sagittal, transverse, frontal, and ensuring that our core is able to stabilize through those 3 ranges of motion in order to keep that rib cage stacked on top of the pelvis. And then when we're kicking, our kicks are able to move a lot more freer. We get a much more accurate representation of like truly what type of range of motion we have. And last but not least is just practicing the art of kicking. Like I just came back from Thailand, bro. I was there for 3 weeks and I was training the entire time that I was there. I come back, I go into my gym, and normally like, I'm working throughout the week, I'm driving a lot, everything. I get into my gym on the Mondays and I do like a training session, and I'll throw a few kicks, and normally it feels pretty stiff. I'm like, oh fuck man, it feels pretty tight. Like I've got to do some stretching, I do my hip aeroplanes, bit of core stuff, like warm up properly, and then I'm good. I came back from Thailand, I didn't warm up, I didn't do shit. I just went and threw a kick and it felt great. It was just whipping up there. And I was like, well, that's just the representation of my body feeling immensely comfortable with that skill, because I've just been doing it on repeat for the past like 3 weeks. So, at the end of the day, if you want to get like higher kicks, you've actually got to train it. You've got to practice it, right? And then over time, your body gets accustomed to that movement pathway, and it doesn't feel so restricted anymore.
Nice. And the reason you drive so fucking long is because you live in Bombay and then you have to drive into the city. I don't know how the hell you do that.
Oh my God.
What happened there?
I got a cramp. That's better.
Nice.
Sorry, bro.
Not enough hip aeroplanes for Steve there. But
not enough water, bro.
Oh man, we've still got some mad lag on this, but Yeah, but we could keep. I mean, we could keep going on this, but we're in this one here. Hopefully, the audio and stuff comes across well in the recording for anyone listening. But for the people who are listening, where can they find you, Steve, and follow what you're doing?
They can just jump onto my Instagram at Steve Pipe Fitness. That's like the easiest place to find me. I know like quite a few of the people that listen to this podcast. That's where they found me as well. So look, I always say to everybody, like, don't be a stranger. If you want to reach out, just reach out. My DMs are always open. I'm always happy to help. Yeah, I genuinely just like to help people. So if you want to work with me, if you just want to like ask a question, it's chill. Come on through.
No, sweet as. I'll link all those down in the description as well. But thanks for coming on, Steve. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, bro. Always nice to be here, man.